first question is, why should you ever jump from C# to call a Ruby API? Okay, you shouldn't actually do that unless you have a really good reason. Okay, every time you will call from C# to Ruby, you have to initialize the engine, and that engine actually kills the performance once it gets initialized. Okay, so you better have a really good damn reason to actually call Ruby APIs. Now, one of the scenarios can be that your friend made some library that interacts, a Ruby library that interacts with Facebook or Twitter, and you don't know Ruby, so you can call that using the C# API. So you can use his Ruby library using C#. Okay, and I'm going to show you over here how you can do that. So the first thing is you need to start the engine for the IronRuby. So this will initialize the engine, okay? And just to check that everything is working, you can say engine.execute, and I can use some Ruby command like hello world from C#. Okay? And I can run this, and you'll see that it took some time, but it printed out hello world from C#, which I use the Ruby code to actually execute this. Okay? Now, but this is all good, but I need to execute some more code. I can write whole code over here as a string, but a better idea would be to write it in a file. Now, I already have the customer file over here, which has a function at get customer name, get first name, and it has a display first name. Okay? So I can call that stuff over here. So I'll just go over to my C#. Instead of executing the code, I can simply say, just execute the content of the file. Execute file. And then I will say customer.rb. This will execute the whole file. Now, after this is executed, everything in this file is now inside the engine. Now engine knows what is in the file, and I can actually execute it. Okay? Let's go over to some of the code that I wrote, and I'll just uncomment this one. Okay? So uncomment this one. And over here. So what I'm doing over here is that I'm saying, okay, customer object, and I'm saying engine.runtime global.getVariable customer. Customer is the name of the class. If you check it out over here, you have a customer class. And then I'm saying, okay, this is not really a real object. I need to get a real object. So I'm going to get operation or create instance of the customer. Now you have the customer, and now at the end you can actually fire the event, which is like engine.operation.invoke member on the object, and the method name, which is get first name. So this particular thing will be executed. This will get executed. It will say John Doe as a name, and it will return John Doe, because in Ruby language, if you don't specify, the last line actually gets returned from the function. Right. So once it got returned, I can simply print it out. I can say console.writeLine message. So it returns John Doe. So we are calling in our Ruby API. We're using a Ruby class, which is customer, and we are invoking the get first name method on the class called customer. Okay. In 2010, you don't have to type this particular line. Okay. This will be replaced by the dynamic keyword. So if you say create instance, and if you say my keyword is dynamic, which will actually mean that it will be any of the languages. It can be IronPython, it can be IronCobol if there's some IronCobol thing going on, IronPorton, everything. All the dynamic languages, so you can do the dynamic keyword. I don't have the 2010 installed, but you can do that. So this will eliminate one line. I know it's long, like 3 or 4 lines of code just to call a method, just to call it, but you can always build a wrapper around it and then call your own API. Okay? But once again, you better have a very good reason to go into the Ruby world. Okay? Now, who is familiar with the notion of behavior-driven development? Okay. So, a little bit about behavior-driven development is, let me go ahead and over here. So, behavior-driven development, I mean, it's a long topic, but in short, it is about the context of the test that you're testing. Okay. So, if I can say that when 1 is passed, it should return false, and that's the actual name of the class, and that's the actual name of my method. Okay, why is it kind of weird looking name? It's because if I have any problems with it, and this is of course unit testing, so if I have any problems, I can just go to the go to the client, and I can say, okay, when I pass 1, it should return false, but it's failing, so there should be something wrong over here. But it's also about the context. When 1 is passed, everything that will happen when 1 is passed should be under this particular class. Okay, so that's what it's all about, behavior-driven development. All right. Now, you can use RSpec, you can use different kind of frameworks that are available in the .NET world, but the problem is they all kind of like, well, tough. Okay, you have to like decorate them with different attributes. You have to do certain stuff. So if I have to do the same thing in Ruby, so how would I do it? Let's go over here and say test. I'm going to test a prime number. Okay, and I'm going to just delete all that stuff. A couple of things you need to do. Here we go. I'm using Ruby gems. I don't think you need this particular thing in the example. You need to have this particular namespace because it contains all the APIs you will use for testing. You will need to have a link to your, this is the C# DLL which you want to test. So it's in business.dll. If I go up, you can actually see the project name, business.dll. Okay, and I'm going to test the class that is prime service, which simply, if you pass in some number, it will tell you if it's prime or not. But we are not going to implement the function, just for dummy purpose. Okay. So how do I test the same thing, that if the prime number is working or not in the Ruby from Ruby? So let me actually go over here and delete all the code. I will say return false. Okay, we'll start with false, and I'll say class. First thing you need to realize about Ruby is the first name of the class should begin with a capital letter. Okay, so I'm going to say when 1 is passed, class end, and then I can say test. Now, for test methods, your prefix should always be test. If you don't type it, it's going to blow away. Test should return false. So basically I'm saying, since 1 is not a prime number, I'm saying when I pass 1, it should return false, because it's not a prime number. Okay? You can also go over here and say, before every test, what do you want to do? You need to initialize variables, right? So I'm just going to say prime service equal to prime service.new. When I say at, it's basically a class level variable that is declared now. So I can use it throughout my class, which is when 1 is passed. So now let's go ahead and test this. I'm going to say over here, okay, prime service dot is prime. I'm passing 1 and assert. It should return me false. You can do different ways. I like to do it like this. So to return me false. Something, this particular result of this should be equal to this. Okay. You can also use assert and like have not or something around it. But this won't work because I haven't inherited from a test file. I mean the test API. So I'm going to say test case over here. Right. If I'm not using include test unit, then I have to type something like this. It really depends if you like to type all that stuff, when you can simply include it and type test case. Alright? So now basically, before every test, this particular line will run, it will initialize your prime service, and then this will test that when I pass 1, it should return me false because prime number, I mean the 1 is not a prime number. How do you test it? You will go over here, you can minimize this.